toward the One, the perfection of love, harmony, and beauty, the only being, united with all the illuminated souls who form the embodiment of the messenger, the spirit of guidance. Welcome everyone. This is the second in a series of 6 classes called the Gabrielite Work, a relational approach to spirituality. And just a brief review of what we covered during the first class. Well, we're going to be talking about what we call the 12 Gabrielite mysteries. So we're going to be covering 2 of them in each class. And last time we talked about relational unity and uniqueness. So relational unity is a different state than we usually go around in, which is a dualistic state of consciousness in which there's a feeling I'm here, you're there, whatever I'm experiencing is separated from me. And that dualistic state of consciousness often carries over even into our spiritual practices. When we sit with our eyes closed, when we meditate, we still have a sense that here we are, and we're trying to tune into something else, some other realm of consciousness, some other being, but still feeling a separation between us and whatever it is that we're experiencing. And as we covered last time, in many spiritual traditions, the only other available choice besides this dualistic state of consciousness is the goal of merging into a state of unity where there's no longer any sense of personal identity. But what we're aiming for in this series, and what the Sufis really aim for, is what's called awakening in life. And this means being able to maintain a sense of identity, but also being able to be in a intimate, you could say permeable state of connection with whatever it is that we're experiencing. So we can feel a circulation of light between ourselves and whatever it is we're experiencing. We don't any longer have the feeling that there's this rigid boundary that stops at our skin, and that's us. And whatever we're experiencing has some other boundary around it. There's a deep feeling of interconnectedness. And that same state can also be experienced in the inner realms. And Ravani Ra is going to be talking about something called the Barzakh, or meeting place, in which it's really an essential element to be able to get into the state of relational unity for the experiences to unfold that she's going to begin describing. The other topic that we covered last time was uniqueness. So this is not boilerplate spirituality. It's not the same sequence of steps for each person, because every being is unique. As I've often quoted Ibn Arabi saying, he said, every soul has access to a unique part of the divine wisdom that no other soul ever could or will be able to have access to. So each of us has something that we can bring forth in our being that no one else can bring forth. And we all have very different ways of going about doing that. And it's very important for us to maintain that sense, not only the sense of identity in our journey towards spiritual awakening, but also what's unique about ourselves, what's sometimes we call it the signature of our soul, what it is that is recognizable in us regardless of whatever state of consciousness we may be in.
So we'll begin with the meeting place. And lately we've been calling it the Barzakh, Barzakh, which is a Sufi term, I guess from the Arabic, that means interval, or it means screen. So I'd like to do a little intro, personal intro about it first. But first I want to ask you, the trouble that we have with understanding the world, that all of us have difficulties with understanding what the world is about, what our place in the world is about. And it could be that because we have a perspective that is so limited. I wanted to make a point here and have you use your imagination a little bit and imagine how it would be if you were only 1 foot tall living in the world that you're living now, and even living in the house that you're in now, and think about how confusing it may be to understand what is around you. So take a little moment to think about that. Okay. So now you return to your usual visual perspectives. Continue to question if there may be a better vantage point for us, if we really could see things better from somewhere that yields more meaningfulness and more wisdom. I think some of us have more ideas than just the visual perspective of looking at the material world around us and trying to make sense of all of those things. It's kind of been even made more difficult in the society that we live in, that often doesn't give clues, that it's not like a native community where people speak to the plants and, have wonderful experiences with nature all around. And some of us have gotten to that place, but a lot of us go around in just the usual I guess, Western civilization way of explaining, and really not very much given, and often not even in the churches, in these spiritual ways of understanding. A lot of people are without that too. So I want to tell you that as a young child, one instance was when my mother was shopping for clothes in a department store. I found a space underneath a circular clothing rack where I found a refuge of sorts, where I could have an inner experience. I found I could pray in the department store, and I enjoyed praying very much, and I was happy to think about that I could pray and nobody even knew I was praying. I rejoiced that I could have this precious contact with another place full of light and freedom right in the midst of my mother shopping for clothes. I had discovered the meeting place, the intersection of our outer and inner experience, where I could pray to my heart's content. And I found I could take that place with me wherever I went. I tell you, I was probably 5 or 6. So it's been a wonderful experience ever since I'm real little. Not a place to retreat from the world, but to add space to what was experienced by the 5 senses. That's important. It added to, rather than taking away and being somewhere else. To make sense of that which the 5 senses told me. Wisdom, you could say. Pir Vilayat would say, that which transpires behind that which appears. So it would be looking for the other part of who we are, that completion of who we are. Many of us here have had discoveries like that, which may have at first been private experiences, isolated from other people. But now we have found others like us. What a fun time that was to find these others. We have found meaningfulness in other ways too, reading and studying and perhaps following our religions, and now an entire spiritual community and organization. Sometimes we've reached beyond our civilization to beings who wrote thousands of years ago and found answers to questions that we have today. We have found resonance in ancient writings, like sacred scriptures that bring answers. In the Zoroastrian tradition, the parent religion of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, some of us here have been learning how the influence of this wisdom on the Islamic Sufis of 1,000 years ago produced amazing perspectives. We are beings who can create meeting places. In a way, we are like bridges, bridging different realms or ways of thinking. We bring ways to connect, to bring inner discoveries to each other. We can make choices and express our unique gifts. We bring meaningfulness. We notice meaning and accept gifts. So one idea from the ancient Sufis was the barzakh, a meeting place between the divine and what is manifest. And the point was made many times in the readings that we've had with these ancient Sufis that there needed to be a place of meeting between the sacred and the manifest. That there's really become a big distance between these two. Excuse me. So when we think of this interface, hopefully we can think of it in not just a very thin layer, but something that could have a lot of body to it, a lot of, we talked about a mirror in a class recently, some of us. So it would really be a mirror that had many layers to it, perhaps, and reflection surfaces, so that many things are really being brought into resonance with each other, as well as being a mirror that reflects the divine and the manifest. A place where spirit becomes matter and matter becomes spirit is another way of explaining what the barzakh is about. So the barzakh, we've made some of this even simpler for you, hopefully, because you really could wander around for many, many years, really trying to find the boundaries of this barzakh, because there were so many manifestations, so many aspects to it. But you could call it a field. And I think it's a better term than, as we've been speaking more as that it was a world or a place. It really is something that you could say is a way, at least a place in consciousness, perhaps, a state of consciousness. And in that place, you feel the connections between many different aspects. It's also a realm of light. So we could feel that there is light there. In fact, you could think of it as your own illumination. As we're contacting the things of the earth, there's a response within us. And that response, when it comes with ideas, inspirations, the heart entering in and loving, this is an operation of the illumination, and all of that is illumination is thought of as the barzakh. So what is the significance of this barzakh, besides it being kind of an inner experience of ours, bringing wisdom? Well, it's the place of all of our psycho-spiritual events. That includes visions, meditations, inspirations. When we come to those places, which a lot of times we say, well, I saw the light, or we feel the light, we feel energy moving in us, we feel energy. So all of those events, you could say, well, that occurred in the barzakh. So again, where is this barzakh? It's really right where you are. There's no other place for it but where you are. However, it is intersecting or placed between the experiences, you would say, of the world, material existence, and any higher realms. Instead of, some of us have studied about the realms of the angels, the realms of light, the realms of truth, the realms of mystery, which are reflected in the Barzakh experiences, part of the Barzakh, as we are sensing everything that is within this realm. It is really the resonance of one upon the other. It's also the place when we talk about Tao wheel. Some of us have learned about that property in which you would say it's harmonic perception, or sometimes even harmonic relationship. So it's a vibrational experience of seeing something in the material world and then understanding something more deeply about that. So you could actually think about that Barzakh, which seems now, as I speak about it, I hope you're getting the feeling of this resonant, light-filled part of ourself. You could even think of it as your aura or your energy. And in that place, then, let's say we see a bird, we get a little glimpse of a bird, but somehow, just from getting that little glimpse, we not only see the beauty of this bird, but we also see some meaningfulness about the bird. It connects us to deeper and greater realms. So this Tao wheel is taking place within the Barzakh. It is that place, again, of resonance, that place of vision, that place of illumination. It is also the place, it is said, of the formation of the resurrection body. So that means that all the experiences that we have in life with the material realm, there is an action through us. In fact, I want to read something from Sufi of 1241. It was one of these sheikhs that has written in the book Spiritual Body, Celestial Earth that some of us have been studying. And he said, each of us has our own activity and perfection, which are in effect an influx of the universal activity of the soul of the world. So what is this saying? This is saying that each one of us has our own activity and perfection, our own way of doing, our own way of affecting the material world, and actually connecting in many different ways all the other realms with the physical world. That's our activity. And our perfection. So that's an amazing word to use for an active kind of verb here, that we perfect things. Well, remember in the invocation, the perfection of love, harmony, and beauty. I mean, you may have been wondering about, well, how do I perfect love? How do I perfect harmony? How do I perfect beauty? Well, the influence of your own soul entering into life and bringing your uniqueness. We speak all over and over about your uniqueness, but you are bringing something, an activity, a force, an energy that no one else can bring to the world. You have your own distinct, as we spoke of the ray coming from the central sun. Here's a nice sun I can use to demonstrate. Each one of us is coming from another angle of that divine. In other words, is comprised of different qualities than any other being, a different combination perhaps of all the different divine qualities that there are. And so that is what we are bringing as we are perfecting. We are having an influence not only using this quality, like we're going to be using the quality of light, all pervading light tonight. So our own impressions of light and our own way of loving light is brought not only to the world through the expression of this divine quality as we bring it into the world, but also it has an effect on the quality itself. So that we become this resonating being that reflects in every way and connects in every way Again, like I said before, the bridge. But this all happens through the Barzakh. Why? Because the Barzakh is a place that has no flattening out or limitation or truncation. It is an opening out, an unfolding. Some of us learned about Sveta Armaidi in the Zoroastrian learnings, and that she asked us to open the house of Sveta Armaidi within us. So it's like unfolding this dimensionality that really is ours. It's kind of funny because we really are not unfolding anything. We are just unfolding our awareness of that unfoldment that we are in this process. But there's no room to do it in the material world. Well, so where can we do this? In the Barzakh, that place that is an inter realm between what we think of as all of the spiritual qualities and God and the realms and the material manifestation. It is our place of unfoldment. So most of the time when we think of the things that we have done in our lives, the people that we have known, those beautiful times that we've had that maybe we remember because we have a picture about it, or we wrote some things down, or we even wrote a book about it. But it doesn't really seem to have all the freshness and the energy of all of that. Well, where can it be kept then? I bet you have an idea. In the Barzakh. And it is being kept there. These things do not disappear. That love that you have for this special being, this accomplishment that you worked, maybe you wrote an opera. You think, well, you know, that was in the past and that was wonderful, and sometimes I can listen to it. All that went into the beautiful creations that you have perfected and brought into the world exist in the Barzakh. And so when they say that that's where your resurrection body comes from, and the life that you have after this body drops away, this body, that's what is meant. That is what is the understanding of all those. Maybe you had read before or heard before in church about the deeds that you have done, you know, are going to be there when this body drops away. Well, this is another way of understanding that very thing. The energies that were created in the process of making these, this activity and this perfection are everlasting. And they are also, this is the last thing here, is they're a collection of all of our unique activities that are saved there. We've spoken about this in some of the other classes, that somehow all of these things are saved. Well, they're saved in an amazing way in this energy and the connectedness that they have through the light, actually, of Svarna, which is both a light and a beingness that will always hold all that you are and all that you have contributed as the divine manifest in life. So that's about the Barzakh. Yeah. So we're going to do a practice using the divine name Nur, N-U-R, and the sound is Nur. Nur is the best way of bringing us to this realm of the Barzakh. So, as again, we did some work with the wazifa last time. This is called wazifa, is another word for the divine quality. You can repeat a word. Often we'll repeat a word. In this case, we're going to be drawing out the sound Nur. But we're not going to say it with these mouths. We're going to say it with our imaginal mouth. You're going to say it with your dream mouth, you could say. So you'll be able to say it in your mind. You could say it like this in your mind. You say it, but why don't you practice right now saying Nur? And by the way, Nur means the all-encompassing light. It's like it's coming from every direction. And there's amazing kind of light that will hold all these beautiful things that we've been talking about. And to keep them in relationship and resonating with each other. All right, so let's say Nur and let it draw out for a pretty long time. Like maybe you could think of seconds and maybe like about 10 seconds worth. So go ahead and begin saying Nur. Go ahead and breathe when you need to. It doesn't have anything to do with you saying it. Mm-hmm. And we can stop right there. Okay. So the usual way of saying this, by the way, would be just saying it in your mind. So were you surprised perhaps at how long you could say Nur? Well, we can say it quite long when we are not breathing at the same time. Our breath is separate from saying the word. It's hard to even explain that because we don't usually do that. Why do it this way? Well, it's an extension. It feels like it goes farther to me. So you could use it in different ways. You could think about somebody that you'd like to send this light to. You could feel like the light is coming from all the stars to you. You could feel like the light is circulating all around. The light is going to a place within you that needs healing. The light of an angel is coming through and blessing your friends or someone that needs it, plus your pet. And then the light can do all these different kinds of things. So we're going to say Nur just a few times. I think the extension that you had when we did it the first time was pretty good. So you could say it like that, and when you finish saying it, you finish Nur. But you're saying it much longer because you don't have to breathe. Then you'll stop, and then you'll start up again. And feel like this radiant light, not especially going one direction or another, but just infusing from everywhere. So let's say Nur. It can be very soft and not forceful at all. One more time. And now not saying it yourself, but just feeling what's already vibrating in the air. What is the Nur that's already there? Sense what it is. Enjoy the experience of it. And now, without hearing the word at all, just sense the changes that have happened because of it. Amen.
So now I'd like to talk about multidimensionality. What does that mean? Well, we're all familiar with the 3 dimensions of space and the 1 dimension of time that forms what is familiar in our world. And in our dualistic state of consciousness, we perceive ourselves as this physical being existing at a particular place in space and time. Like each of you is listening to this live right now, or some people are going to be watching this video later on YouTube, but you're at a particular location when you're doing that. And your identification with yourself is typically going to be the person that's you sitting here having the experience that you're having. Well, both scientists and mystics say that there's many more dimensions than those 3 dimensions of space and 1 of time. The most current major theory in string theory in physics is that there's 10 dimensions. And most of those dimensions are very tiny and they're curled up within the ones that we are familiar with. And in different mystical traditions, there's different ways of parceling up what are called subtle realms or sometimes subtle planes. Some Sufi traditions have 14 subtle realms, some have 7, and they're given various names like the Jinn plane, the realm of genius, the angelic plane, realm of pure spirit, and so on. And this is somewhat analogous to the way we describe colors on the color spectrum. We have our familiar names that we give those colors, but in other cultures, those names may not be used. In fact, they may have many more names for degradations of part of that spectrum. And there's actually millions of colors that we can perceive, and it's just an arbitrary way of dividing up that spectrum. And furthermore, that spectrum is just a tiny part of the electromagnetic spectrum, most of which we're not able to perceive. We can't perceive ultraviolet, we can't perceive infrared, we certainly can't perceive X-rays, and so on. But some animals can perceive ultraviolet and some can perceive infrared. Some can hear ultrasonic sounds and subsonic sounds, like elephants can hear very low frequency vibrations that we can't hear. And so we are centered in our perspective of what reality is like, and it's hard for us to imagine there's more to that than what we can see. Well, even in astronomy, there's telescopes that can pick up infrared and ultraviolet, and there's instruments that can pick up gravitational waves and so on. And the universe looks very different when you're looking at it through a particular aspect of vibration. And that's just in the manifest universe. The manifest universe is so much richer than what we think it is. Ravani Ra was having us imagine if we were only 1 foot high beings and we're trying to make sense out of the world, it would be pretty difficult to be able to do that. Well, in our spirituality, we try to make sense of a much deeper reality, but we're used to doing that through the perspective of our physical senses. And even if our eyes are closed, we're doing it through the perspective of our concepts about what things should be like. So we try to translate things into the experiences of physical senses. Mystical traditions talk about our capacity to develop subtle senses of sight and hearing and touch and so on, which is a totally different way of perceiving. And there's many practices that can help us become sensitive to being able to pick up on different forms of energy. So this is just a foundation for the idea of multidimensionality. So part one of multidimensionality is that there are multiple levels of existence, and we're usually only cognizant of the physical realm and what exists there. And as I said, those 3 dimensions of space and 1 of time. We're usually not at all aware of what we tend to describe as higher dimensions. And in our typical way of thinking, we tend to think of theirs up there, like I'm going to get into a higher state of consciousness. I'm going to tune into something that's someplace else than here. And it's a challenge for us to realize that what we're trying to experience is not any place different than right here, but our perception keeps us from being able to perceive what's right here. And so we could say one aspect of awakening, which is an aim of spirituality, is to be able to first become capable of experiencing those subtle levels of vibration. So one of the most common ones in many traditions is the angelic realm. The Sufis say that we have an angelic body, not just after we leave this physical realm, but we have one right now, and that angelic body is much larger than our physical body. But we tend to think of our inner experiences as something that's inside this body. We close our eyes, we're going to hunt around in there and look for it. We won't find it in there. It's not in the same space that we're looking for it in. And so we have to first become capable of, we could say, modulating our consciousness, just like with a radio receiver. If you want to get to a higher frequency station, you have to turn the dial to that station, otherwise you won't get it. We have to be able to attune ourselves to a higher state of vibration to be able to experience one of those subtle realms described in the mystical traditions. At first, when we start to have experiences like that, and many people have had mystical experiences. I saw a survey in the United States, 60% of the population reports having had at least one mystical experience, which was not necessarily intentional. It was just out of the blue, and the person might have thought, well, that was just really weird. I was hallucinating, but it was being in a different state of consciousness than the usual one. So we tend to think that when something like that happens, well, I don't know how I got to that place. That must be some other level of reality, but I am right here. I'm in this reality. That's up there. I'd like to get back up there, so let me try to repeat the way I got there before. And sometimes that might work. Sometimes by doing certain spiritual practices, we can experience more subtle levels of reality, but we still, our old way of thinking is thinking that those are separate from us, that we don't really exist there. We're just kind of like putting up a periscope and looking around up there and then coming back down to here. Many of you are familiar with the Sufi term of hal, H-A-L. Hal means a temporary peak experience, doesn't last. And many of you have had such experiences. But the state that we're in for an extended period of time is called our maqam, M-A-Q-A-M, which means our station. It's kind of the level that we're at, and we're working on things. And then we undergo a shift in our consciousness, and we reach a different level. And there's a period in between, and these terms are familiar to some of you. Fana means a shattering, F-A-N-A, or breaking down of a previous level. There's an in-between state when things seem chaotic, you're not sure what's going to emerge. And then Baqa, B-A-Q-A, means rebirth, reorganization, or resurrection. Now you enter into a different station. So over time in our journey to awakening, we start to develop these subtle senses. We start to develop the capacity to experience these subtle dimensions of reality. And then at some point, we discover that it really is a reality, what the mystics are saying, what Hazrat Inayat Khan said, that the human being is the only being in all the universe who has his or her existence in all the realms of existence. So the angels exist in the angel realm, the jinns exist in the realm of the jinn. We exist in all those different realms, but our awareness of our existence in those subtle realms is dormant or latent until we do something to awaken it. And even when at first we start to awaken to some of those other levels, we tend to perceive it as just something different from us. But gradually, and an aim in the Gabrielite work is to first become capable of realizing these multiple dimensions on which we exist, but then discovering a circulation between all of these different levels of light that is going on all the time, and all of that is us. So being able to experience a unified sense of identity that, and language doesn't have a really good way of describing this, a unified sense of identity in which we are existing in multiple vibrational states all at once. And at any particular time, our consciousness is focalized in a particular vibrational level. So what's the simple way of describing that? Almost all the time, our consciousness is focused in the physical realm, and that level of vibration, which is limited to what you can perceive in the 3 dimensions of space and 1 of time. When we're start to have experiences through the subtle senses in these more subtle realms, then we have access to another dimension of ourselves. We already exist there. We just hadn't been aware of it, and we hadn't known how to be able to integrate our existence in those other realms with our physical manifest self. Well, why is that important? A lot of times when people undergo the journey of spiritual awakening, there's much greater attraction in the inner and subtle realms, the very beautiful experiences of light and sound and transcendent states of consciousness. And then you finish your meditation and look around in the world and go, oh, I'm going to go back to where I was. That's so much better than this. And Pir Vilayat had a great term for that. He called it the spiritual bypass. The spiritual bypass is not dealing with what needs to be dealt with in manifestation and just trying to pretend it's not there so you can hang out in much more enjoyable places, but we're not going to fulfill our purpose in awakening, and we're certainly not going to become complete beings. And in fact, if we really give in to that temptation to do that, more and more we'll become less capable of functioning in the world. We'll become too sensitive to deal with what's going on in the world. We just will want to retreat from it. But once again, the purpose of Sufism is awakening in life. What is the life that we awaken to? It is so much more than the world of 3 dimensions of space and 1 of time. That's the world that we thought we existed in, and our sense of identity was limited to, you could say, just that little tiny cross section of our being that exists in that reality, whereas the reality of who we are is so much vaster than that. And so the world that we're awakening in is a transformed world. And when we're able to do that, even though we're still walking around in physical manifestation, everything is so much richer than it was before. Excuse me. And in particular, when we can be in this state of relational unity that I was talking about at the beginning of this class, then we can feel that permeability in whatever we're connecting with. We can allow our experiences to all be openings to sacredness instead of something that causes us to just constrict and withdraw and react from it. We become much, much more capable of functioning in life. And not only that, we can become catalysts of transformation, not that we're trying to go push something on anything, but just the natural state of our being will be one that opens up possibilities, that opens up more and more light being able to come through.
Would you please give us an example of something that seems like a problem in our lives that we'd rather avoid, and how that could open up into something else?
Yeah. So I'm sure everybody either on live right now or watching this video later can think of at least one person that you've had dealings with, or maybe you continue to have dealings with in your life, that you just assume they move someplace far away. The difficult person, you react, they make you angry, you can't reason with them. And when you think about them, you might just feel a tightening up inside. Well, Pir Vilayat said sometimes God uses a stick to help us awaken, and some people are really good at being sticks. So we can think about, well, what's needed in my interaction with this person? If I had a certain quality that I had much more of, what would really help transform this? And it might be compassion. It might be you've been very judgmental towards this other person, and then you start to realize, well, maybe there's things you don't know about them. Maybe they've got some illness that they haven't talked about, or they have some very difficult situation going on, or maybe because of the way they've been brought up, they have a lot of anger and they cause everybody to react against them. And the more other people project onto them this image of them as being an awful person, the more they come to identify with it, and they're really stuck in it. But so are the people that are interacting with them are stuck because they get caught up like playing out a script that's not very adaptive. So let's say you feel, well, compassion is really needed here. I'm going to allow myself to open to the divine compassion being present here. And just like Ravani Ra was talking about, Nur, this all-pervading light coming from everywhere, instead of thinking yourself sending out compassion, it's like everything in that situation is suffused with compassion. It's becoming available to everything in that situation. Now, when you do this, you can't count on or even expect or assume, oh, now the other person is just going to be just all love and light because, hey, I turned on the compassion valve. You can't assume that at all, but your response to them and you're being able to keep your heart open to them perhaps is going to plant a seed in them that might not bear fruit for 20 years down the road, but it might trigger something. You're seeing past the surface appearance of what they appear to be and who they think they are to that unique divinity that's present within them, even though it might be covered up pretty well by the outer appearance. So Pir Vilayat would say you're looking into their divine countenance instead of the face that you see on their physical face. That's going to transform that situation, at least from your side of things. It's going to bring about a change in that. It's going to open up something. So I'd like to do a little segue here into something that those of you that have watched previous classes have heard about, but not everybody that's watching this was in on those, called Bekenstein's bound. Bekenstein is a scientist who had a very simple proof. You didn't have to be a scientist to understand it. And he proved that whenever there's an interface between two things, so all of you are watching us on an interface, your phone, your laptop, your iPad, or whatever. But imagine, well, he said whenever there's an interface between two things, there's a finite limit to how much information can be transmitted in either direction. And that limit is related to the surface area of the screen. So let's translate this into spirituality. Imagine you go into a room and there's a monitor and there's a host there and says, well, you're very lucky because we've managed to establish a Zoom call with God for you. So God's on the other end. And you might be thinking, oh, I'll be able to understand everything about all of existence now. No, you won't. That screen is finite. There's only a finite amount of information that could possibly come through into life from the divine being. Okay. But how about the other direction? We usually think of God as being omniscient. God knows everything. From this, there's a finite amount of what can be known by what's on the other side, in this case, God, of everything that's in existence, because You can't have infinity coming through the interfaces. And what are the interfaces? The meeting places in the Barzakh. You can't have an infinite meeting place. It can be very vast, but it can't be infinite. So there's a limit of what can be known in either direction, and we can increase what's possible to come through that interface, the Barzakh, by the degree to which we've awakened to the multidimensional reality of our being. So if what we're bringing to the Barzakh is a limited dualistic sense of self, we'll be able to have some experience, but it would be an example that comes to mind. Those of you that are old enough to remember the old modems, that if you had the sound, you hear all these screeching sounds, but that was all the information coming through, which your computer translated into some usable form. Well, you can't do much with the screeching sound. You have to have something that transforms that into a digestible part. And what comes through can't be infinite. But the more of ourselves that we bring to that meeting place, the more that can come through. And not only the more that we can experience the divine side, but the more the divine can experience of our side, which the Sufis say is the reason why creation got started in the first place. So I'd like to have us do a meditation now on multidimensionality. So close your eyes. And Pir Vilayat would often suggest, well, just play like what if. So what if I'm saying is absolutely true? You are a multidimensional being. You have existence in all these realms. You do exist in all these realms this moment. So if you wanted to get in touch with your physical foot, you don't have to go on a long journey, just wiggle your toes and there it is, right? That seems kind of silly. So imagine now that you just set forth the intention that you would like to be able to have an experience of yourself as a multi-dimensional being, and you perhaps never put that request in the hopper before, and so you didn't get a response. It's like if you had the search screen for Google and you didn't put anything in there and you hit enter, it's just going to sit there waiting for you to put something in there. So in this case, you're putting in the request. I'd like to just experience my multidimensional being. And you enter into a state of what psychologists call passive volition, which means being open and receptive, not trying to push anything, just allowing. And you might immediately begin to feel some energy. You might feel it in your head. You might feel it in your hands and feet. You might feel it in your chest, in your heart center. You might feel something stirring. And use that as something you're going to navigate to, open up more and more in your connection with. And at first you might have an awareness of certain vibrational states of your multidimensional being. And that's wonderful. Open to that. Feel it. And if you're listening to a chord on the piano, let's say, you can hear the beautiful notes all together. And if you listen more intently, you can hear overtones. So now let yourself open to overtones, so to speak, of the subtle vibrational levels of your being, and set your intention to, now I'd like to become aware of more and more subtle levels of who I am. And you keep the previous ones that you've opened connection with there, and this is just added to it. It's augmenting this awareness of you being in multiple levels of vibration, subtle energy and subtle light. And every breath that you take, moves through every single one of these realms, all the way to the divine being that created you. And as you exhale, all the way down into your physical manifestation. So now as you notice your breathing, allow yourself to feel what's carried in both directions on each breath. The light that returns, that's been transformed by all of your experiences in existence, and the overtones of that light as it's returned. And as you exhale, the descending light from the divine through all the levels of your being, all the way to your physical being and manifestation. But keep the lights turned on all of the levels. You can be simultaneously aware of all of these levels without stepping back and thinking about what you're experiencing. You're just being in this state, multi-level vibration. And you might hear subtle sounds or feel subtle kinds of kinesthetic sensations, subtle forms of light you might perceive, even sometimes a subtle taste or smell. And realize that what you're getting a taste of here is existing in your resurrection body, a body that will never die, that can experience in any and all levels of existence. That's endowed with what it is that makes you a unique expression of the divine being. The Sufis say, die before death and resurrect now. This means we can experience our resurrection body in this life, and we can be in the world taking care of all our responsibilities and all of our relationships, being fully grounded, and at the same time experiencing the marvel of who we are and what everything else truly is. Hazrat Khan said some beautiful words. He said, may the heavens be reflected on the earth, Lord, that the earth may turn into heaven. As we awaken these multiple dimensions of our being, these multiple vibrational states in which we exist, and they circulate with each other, then all the worlds, all the realms are transformed. May the message of God reach far and wide, illuminating and making the whole of humanity as one single family in the parenthood of God. Amen.